Hi, my name is Alec Thompson. I'm Multicultural and Public Service Marketing Director at LAVIDGE, and I'm excited to welcome everyone to the second webinar in the Multicultural Matters webinar series. Last time we explored some data and population demographic trends as explained by our great partners at the Arizona Hispanic Chamber of Commerce and One Community, and we took a dive into understanding what's happening in that space, what's happening among those populations in terms of population growth, economic impact, some of the challenges faced by these communities. And today we're really going to explore how we can start activating not just those communities, but all diverse communities, how we can use data to help guide our opportunity, determine our opportunity, and benchmark current audiences to identify those untapped audiences. We're also going to explore how that message can be carried out to these populations, and really looking at some of those tactics that are working to deliver messages in a really targeted way to populations so that we're making sure that messages are resonating more. Last but not least, we'll talk about how creative can really help to carry a message further that resonates and help organizations and their causes be embraced by diverse populations and by the general market for that matter, because now more than ever, consumers and Americans are demanding that respect for their culture, for acknowledgement of their culture. And so we really want to make sure that when we're advising our clients on how to be inclusive in their marketing, that they're really doing it in an impactful way that resonates and helps drive impact and shows respect to diverse populations. So our first session today is really focused on identifying that opportunity for growth and understanding when to take that first step to really engage a multicultural audience in the right way. And we have Sean Rogers, Client Services Director at LAVIDGE, here with us, as well as Tim Trull, Managing Director of Strategy, and Sabrina Norris, Associate Client Services Director. So welcome everyone. Thank you for being here to talk about identifying opportunity in marketing to reach untapped audiences. So Sean, I wanted you to start with you to get us kicked off here. How can organizations identify opportunity? You have a unique background in retail and activating audiences to come in and be consumers and embrace new brands that maybe they weren't part of before. So can you tell us a little bit about what that kind of first step looks like to identifying opportunity to reach untapped audiences?
The first step when I'm working with a new client is to understand how they are currently segmenting their customers. There's a lot of ways to do that. If you're talking about a retail location, it could be geographic segmentation. Or if it's a specific type of product, then it might be demographic. There's also ways, within the housing market, you can segment audiences just by the price tiers that you're talking about, right? So understanding how a client currently segments their audiences is first and foremost. We don't like to go in and reinvent things. If they've done a lot of research on their own, we can utilize that to understand what is it that they know about their existing base.
So does that mean that the first step is really kind of understanding what they're currently doing, but then taking that data and comparing it with the overall population to identify those untapped markets?
Absolutely.
Would that be kind of step two?
Yes. And so the next thing that you want to do is you might look into some secondary research that can be purchased. It might be information that you get from Scarborough. It might be information that you obtain from an entity like Claritas. If you're able to understand who it is that brand is currently reaching and who it is that they should be reaching but they're not, maybe their competitors are reaching them, that's where you really start to see opportunity.
So Sean talked a little bit about identifying those untapped audiences and trying to activate them in a really intentional way. Sometimes a client will come to us and know that they need to reach a certain audience to really make sure that they're covering the entire population. Sabrina, we worked together on the 2020 census campaign, which started before the pandemic, but then ran through the pandemic. I know you've done a lot of work with the Arizona Secretary of State's office to communicate voting information during the pandemic also. So what are some challenges that you often see? How do you overcome a challenge that great to reach people with that critical information?
You know, it kind of starts with, as Tim had mentioned, with the creative. So we're always constantly looking at developing a creative that not just speaks to the general consumer market or the Hispanic consumer market, but kind of to the market as a whole. You know, we kind of look at it holistically, and we're trying to reach as many people as possible. So as opposed to back in, you know, you used to create one campaign for the general market, one campaign for the Hispanic market, and then, you know, you would just translate it and go on from there, where now we kind of combine it all together and do what we call like a transcreation. So we are already kind of creating it from the start to reach everyone. It's just the tactics part, I would say, is what we do differently. So for example, for the census, you know, before pandemic, we had kind of a set media plan, but then we realized when the pandemic hit, we had to figure out how we can reach our audiences now that everyone's at home, where before we had, you know, set up for people to be outside of their home seeing this message. So what we decided to do is we kind of took a deep dive and figured out, you know, who's the most important people we're going to be missing now. And so, for example, with the Hispanic market, we figured out, you know, they're big with their mobile phones, we're big with social media. So we developed a campaign kind of around that to specifically hit them in the market and be able to target them. With the text campaign, it went directly to their phones, which they're constantly on. We also did a little bit more digital media since people were home as well. So we kind of looked at it, you know, our campaign we felt was strong, but then it's like the tactics. So same thing with the Secretary of State. We decided to go ahead and hit also rural markets. You know, there's an untapped audience, also not just the Hispanic, but also for the Native audience. And so we went to those rural markets. We, you know, realized that print now is a better way to hit them and go from there.
And I'm glad you said that, because I think access is also equally important, right, to connectivity in that specific case. And with census, for example, we knew that the connectivity levels were lower in some rural communities and some tribal communities. So delivering them with a phone number was a little bit more impactful than sending them to the website. So Sean, you talked a little bit about identifying those untapped audiences. What's a really important kind of next step in terms of starting that to lay the groundwork for reaching them?
I think I had talked about the secondary research. Oftentimes we'll peel back the onion a little bit further and use primary research as well to segment audiences. And part of that might be attitudinal segmentation. So it has nothing to do with demographics. It has everything to do with how a person feels about a particular product or service or thing that they have to do as they enter into that process of either buying or engaging. And so you can conduct research that might segment an audience by how they feel about a particular product, how they interact with it, and oftentimes we'll do that through a proprietary study.
Yeah, and anymore, you know, fragmentation in the media is so prevalent. You know, everything is fragmented. So you can get very, very relevant to each one of your audiences in a very unique way because of the fact that there is so much fragmentation in the media. So, you know, you can really speak to an audience and what is meaningful to them very specifically these days. And so instead of, you know, one large mass media campaign, oftentimes it's a lot of, you know, micro campaigns that you're really doing out there. So the more that you know about the audiences on the front end and the different things that appeal to them, the better off we are in really making sure that we reach them in a relevant way.
Right. And we'll be hearing more about that from Stephen next in terms of how we can really segment an audience and get them information that is relevant to them.
Yep.
And that meets them where they are. So just kind of, I mean, this group here, all of you are a lot of times the first interaction at LAVIDGE, right? So What do you see as kind of a trend? Do you see that often new clients or prospective clients understand that that opportunity to speak in a really authentic way to different audiences?
It's interesting. I find that many times, for as much information as any business or entity winds up collecting on their base, they don't always act upon it. So they may have a repository of information that they really haven't dug too far into. And so helping them do that, being able to provide some additional bandwidth is part of what we do, an important part of what we do.
And I also think too, they know the message they need to put out there and they know what they need to be doing, but I don't think they know how. And I think that's where we come in is, they have, like Sean said, all the information, they just don't know how to put the puzzle pieces together. And that's where we come in and help them with the strategy, kind of help them hone in on their messaging. And then we also follow it up with like the tools and the tactics that they need to kind of execute that.
The other piece of that's really impacted now is, as we come out of the pandemic, a lot of client side are still struggling to, staff up, because with the Great Resignation, there's a lot of people that are gone now. So they're leaning even more on their agency partners to provide the insights, to provide that strategy, and provide, the look into some of the data, as Sean says, that maybe it's just, laying there on the shelf and they just aren't using it because they don't have time or resources to be able to do that.
So it sounds like sometimes it's a proactive measure where you're like, I need to reach this audience with this information. Sometimes it's like, we know that this audience exists and we're not seeing them activated. It's kind of that balance that it just kind of depends, right?
And sometimes it's, we think that we've tapped our potential, but really there's this huge delta between where they are and where they could be.
Is that a hard message to deliver to a client where you're trying to help them realize that opportunity that is just waiting for them?
I think some clients are more receptive to it than others. I think some struggle with it, and I think it's just kind of finding the way. I think a lot of it is kind of how we present, the message or, the strategy behind it, even if we sometimes have to go as far as even giving them sample creative for them to see kind of how that would live and how they could see it and, how it would work when you actually put it out in the market. So it can, clients, sometimes I think it's more of, they're not resistant, I think they're scared because it's uncomfortable for them and they've never actually done that before. And so they don't know what the outcome is going to be. So they're always trying to play it safe where sometimes you need to kind of just take the chance and make the leap and see what happens.
Or they like the part where it's, there's untapped potential. They don't like the part where it's, here's what it's going to cost to reach that untapped potential, because that is what's scary. They have to go to their CFO and ask them to be on board.
Sure. So Sean, you just talked a little bit about how you identify opportunity by benchmarking your current existing consumer base. But how can you quantify that? How can you convince that CFO to make that investment in reaching untapped audiences?
I think that you have to understand the value of your current customers. So if you can understand the value, the lifetime value, or the value within a particular quarter for your consumer base, and then you identify those individuals that you're missing, that's where you start to quantify the value of bringing on those additional consumers. And that's information that may reside in your current repository of customers, right? Because that allows you to extrapolate the value of an additional set of customers.
And I think it's important to note that sometimes you're not going to get immediate results, right? It's about building the brand awareness within a certain community, but it usually pays off. right? I mean, if you look at a population like the Hispanic market, we know that statistically they are more brand loyal than other consumers.
Yeah.
So if you can build that brand awareness, earn their trust, be embraced by them, and deliver a good product and operation, whatever we're talking about, it might pay off, right?
Absolutely.
And so, Tim, I think you often talk about operations and kind of following through. Like, you might get the message out, but are you ready to handle that? We talk a lot about looking at operations almost before starting a big marketing push.
Yeah.
Can you explain why that's so important?
Honestly, that's probably one of the biggest mistakes companies make, is they may have a broader strategy that they want to increase market share, and they may say, well, you know what, within a particular market, we think that, if we target the Hispanic market, that's going to help us to increase our market share. The thing that they oftentimes forget is, what's the service experience going to be for them? So one of the first things that we do is, as Sean say, we go in and we take a look at what really is, from a target market standpoint, what do we know about these folks? What can we really learn about them? And from an operations standpoint, how are they servicing them? An example is, we were doing work for a large hospital network, and their goal was basically that we wanted to increase our overall share. And so after doing the research, finding out where the opportunities were, the next thing we did is we took a look at all of their clinics and all of their hospital locations and said, are you ready for in their case, it was increased amongst the Hispanic market, are you ready for, at an operational standpoint, to be able to handle these folks and have the service experience that they expect? So looking at everything, which was obvious, like, do you have Spanish speakers there? Do you have things in both Spanish and English? But maybe the not so obvious things, like, are your waiting rooms large enough to handle this market? Because, as you know, oftentimes whenever someone is in the hospital or whatever within Hispanic market, they bring their entire family down to the waiting room. So it's making sure that you can operationally handle the market, but also being very diligent on how it is that we can, target that market and then bring them, have them, give them the kind of a service experience that they are really looking for.
So it sounds like multicultural, it really needs to be at the center of everything that we're doing. And really not just for a multicultural specific campaign, but really for every campaign these days, right? So putting it at the center helps you understand that insight that operations will also be impacted.
Yeah.
So we don't want to engage that audience until we know that we can handle them, right?
Yeah, it's a broader strategy. It's not just a marketing strategy. It's an operational strategy. Mm-hmm. And so I think that if companies look at it in that way, then they can be equipped to be able to handle the market in a way that they can give them that experience that they're really looking for.
Well, I want to just thank you all for being here today, but any final thoughts?
I'd say that the volume of information that you're able to obtain about your customer base doesn't mean that you should always act upon it. For example, you can segment something down to a point where the audience is too small to perhaps take action on. And I know that Stephen is going to be talking about digital audience segmentation next. So I think it's important to evaluate the cost versus the return in each instance. And that's
Sean makes a really good point. You can get into, because of fragmentation, because of all the different information that you've got, you can get into a analysis paralysis kind of a situation. And certainly, I think that you want to shy away from that and get back more to what Sabrina was saying about being a little bit more simplistic about it. Get very focused on what it is that we need to say, who we need to go after, and then just really do that.
So it sounds like asking the question is important, but also making the decision when you're ready is also important. Because getting it right is just important.
Yeah,
right?
critical.
Yeah, critical. Yeah. Hey, well, thank you all. I really appreciate your time today.
You bet.
Thanks.
So we just heard about how we can benchmark our audiences to really realize opportunity to engage untapped audiences and consumers and take messages further to increase results. So now we're going to hear from Stephen Heitz, Chief Innovation Officer at LAVIDGE, to understand what are the tactics that can help us deploy messaging and carry that message even further. Welcome, Stephen.
Hi, Alec. It's so fun in my role to be able to unify our marketing communications efforts around digital, traditional media, also all the digital marketing strategies and our account marketing strategies and technology. They all have to come together, and they make it a really amazing opportunity for our clients. I think benchmarking is just so amazing because it lets us know really how we're doing, and if we have goals of really being, reaching more of a certain audience, then we can use a lot of digital tactics to really build community and really build our both awareness and preference and ideally customer base and loyalty within those segments.
Sure, because sometimes we know what audiences we need to reach. Other times we don't even realize who we're not talking to, right? So what are you seeing kind of happen in the digital space? Obviously digital advertising has transformed the way that we advertise, but we've also seen a lot of evolution happen within that space in recent years. So what are we doing to make sure that we're getting the right message to the right people in the right way?
Yes, so you bring up the most trending topic that's going on right now is what's going to happen with digital media. The promise was one-to-one marketing to each consumer, the right message, the right medium, the right time, and that was all driven by technology that was allowing me to personally identify you and know a lot about you for lots of reasons. And rightly so, we've needed to pull that back and really start looking more at groups that contain large groups of people, so 1,000, 10,000 or more, and make sure that there's anonymity so that we're not violating any privacy, and also really preventing hate. I think what was happening is that although there was a lot of good use of digital targeting on the one-to-one basis, hate groups got out there and started targeting people with hate messages. And that really isn't something anybody should tolerate. And so there's been a pullback to make sure that we're equitably distributing our communications amongst a larger group. So for our brands who are seeking to really break into new audiences that they're not talking to now, there's a couple of ways we need to think about how they can reach those audiences. I think the first one is, goes back to the idea and strategy of representation, right? So once we have created representative creative, that representation, might be easily found in influencers. And so I think the starting tip of the spear here is what influencers in the digital space are my new audiences that I'm looking to attract already connecting with? And can I use them to help me reach them with representative creative because they already have the following that I might be looking for? Sponsorships also fit into that a little bit. Once you get past that kind of direct influencer sponsor role, I think the next step is to really know your community and know the content they're consuming, both offline and online. So whether that's a certain type of shows they're watching or streaming, or certain types of radio stations, music they're listening to, Pandora, or Spotify, wherever they are, that the content itself can be a great indicator of of where our people are, and so being where they are, in addition to being representative. So we have our representation, and then we're being where they are. And then from a digital, the last thing after you get from representation with influencers to content focus, what they're consuming, the last thing is all about your database. And what kind of database marketing or first-party data can you work with to get your images out or messages out in a very specific way? So depending on the sophistication of your benchmarking program, you may already now have your customer list, and you might be able to have that also broken down by these new audiences that you're seeking. And if you have that segmented, now we can start to build lookalike models or use other tools to kind of expand that and or talk to those specific customers across all the tactics. Email, I mentioned lookalike modeling that would happen in both social and programmatic, and kind of dial that message in and try to find more of those audiences that you might already have. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so it sounds like there's really two kind of pieces to this. There's kind of making sure that you're maximizing the impact of your the data you own, kind of building on that from other first-party
Right.
data sources, but then also going a little bit broader and utilizing a media like Pandora, for example, where we're finding the audience that we're trying to speak to by looking at consumption trends, be it, putting a Spanish advertisement on a Spanish language station.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So to that kind of point, how do we like kind of take that next step? Like, what should someone's first step be to really start engaging with new audiences, taking their message and refining it a little bit? How do we then deliver that message?
Yeah, so that's all going to come back to the goal. So from your benchmarking conversation, you said, okay, I would like to really make sure that I am not ignoring this new audience, and I have currently X% of this audience today. Now I want to get to Y percentage, and now I understand the messaging, to your point about why they're not working with me or how I need to communicate to them. So I've developed some creative. The gotcha here really comes down to there will be different tactics based on the individual audience you're targeting and its size and your goal. Also, the value that a customer brings to you over his lifetime, and all those strategies have to kind of come into the media mix. But in general terms, the smaller the audience you're looking to reach, the more tactics you need to employ because you don't know where they are. So you want a reach-based plan. So let's say you were trying to reach 1,000 people, you would want to be everywhere. Connected TV, digital audio, that includes your Pandoras and Spotifys. You'd want to be on social. You'd want to probably even do some direct mail. You'd want to do some, so you'd want to really try to reach those. Now, because it's a list and it's 1,000 people and you have the list, traditional media that might have higher reach and lower cost might not be factored into your equation. Now, if you're really trying to penetrate a broader audience, and for example, I know in Arizona, we are blessed with a lot of large Hispanic audience that I think is ignored by a lot of brands. The question is, because they're 30, 40, 50% of the audience in some cases, great reach vehicles are available to you in traditional media, whether that's TV, even Univision, Telemundo, or radio stations, or even outdoor, that will really help you get to those audiences at a very efficient media level.
I'm glad you brought that up because I think even though we're talking a lot about digital media here, it's really about finding that sweet spot, right? Building that mix that's going to get you the frequency levels needed to really drive results.
Yeah.
So how are we seeing that happen? Are we seeing strategies built around kind of a balanced approach?
What we find is that depending on the sophistication of the brand we're working with, there's, especially as we get into kind of smaller brands, digital has spoiled them a little bit because of the intent of the audience is so high. So for example, when I'm searching to buy a car, my intent is high. So I don't have to follow the normal media math that's needed to make media work when I'm advertising, say, on Google search, because if I get one or two people who are searching to buy a car and they buy a car, it's all good. But when you get beyond true intent, where it's like, I need a plumber, I need a car, and I'm searching, and you start dabbling in media outside of that, we get into what I call random acts of media buying. I probably shouldn't say that. I should probably credit that to Jim Knapp from KTAR, who kind of introduced that term to me. But these random acts of media buying then become disillusionment points for our brands who are saying, well, it didn't work. So to avoid a random act of media buying, you have to build that awareness and preference over time. And you also have to follow the media math rules, which basically says if you're not going to hit at least 35% of your audience weekly, to roll up to 65% monthly, to roll up to 85% quarterly, you should keep your money, save it for the day when you can, because that's the only way we get a statistically significant lift in the metrics we're looking for, sales, new customer acquisitions, in media buying. So what we see is somebody comes and says, well, I've got this budget, and then when we look and say, okay, well, will it get us 35% reach with, across all of this medium? The answer might be no. And so in that case, we say, let's wait, and let's find a way to build the business case and the revenue to support the customer acquisition efforts you'll really need.
So one thing we talk a lot about when we're doing a multicultural media marketing plan, or really any marketing plan at this point, especially in Arizona, is how are we going to reach certain populations? We're looking at factors like access to connectivity. We're looking at zip codes and really making sure that we're placing media in a really strategic way and in a way that we're going to make sure that that audience is going to receive it. We did some of this with Census, for example, deploying text messages to rural Arizona, keeping in mind that the connectivity level was going to be a little bit lower. So can you talk a little bit about examples like that and why it's so important to really be in touch with community to get the message out the right way?
Community is important on a number of levels. I think the examples you just gave are really kind of related to media consumption and the granularity of the media consumption understanding. So if we look at a target audience and we know that, for example, in your case of the rural text messaging, there's lower connectivity and there's probably not great cell phone internet access in a lot of cases, where would we shift the media mix to make sure that we're reaching them, and text messaging being a great example in that case. I also think, even in urban areas where there is decent connectivity, we also see for some audiences that their main consumption is through a smartphone. So really shaping the media buy around mobile is very important. And then there might be other audiences where we might even get back to print. For example, in tribal nations, or in certain Spanish language cases where they're picking up some of these print publications or TV. So this really does matter, and I think the issue is we can't think of anything as a monolith. I think that's the challenge with media planning, right? Is you think, okay, well, I want to hit a certain target audience that I make a superficial judgment that they all are mobile first, or that they all are watching Telemundo, or and that's not the case. I think what we see is the variation is so amazing and ubiquitous. Even in the same household, you're going to have very different media consumption patterns. So that comes back to really good strategic planning before you get to the media brief. Which I think was why Census was so successful, is there was, somewhere in the dozen to 200 various communities being targeted. Some of them were more grassroots targeting, where the advertising was more supportive of, think about just going in and boosting the post of a community leader in Census to their community. Sure. To make sure they have reach, very specific, very micro, versus, a broad TV spot where, again, in those cases, you bring the diversity into the creative so that you are trying to be able to speak to everybody in the same way.
Sure. I'm glad you said that culture is not a monolith, because it's not, and it's intersectional, and more than ever, consumers are demanding respect to that, right? So if we're going to be talking about creative next and developing authentic, inclusive creative, but it sounds like what you're saying is that the strategy and the media buy it's equally important to go into it with that perspective.
Right, and I think even our creative team will say that the best work we do is when we do it all together and we understand how the creative execution and the media buy may intersect. Mm-hmm. And I also think this goes back to, laddering back up to strategy, one of the focuses we have as an agency is to say, boy, even people of the same age and or maybe gender or household income don't act like a monolith either. Right, so it's not like this is something, but marketers have built this whole structure around demographics. But the reality is there's Democrats and Republicans in every age, every gender, every whatever, and so people really want you to know that you understand them, and that's where the advertising and the media have to intersect to say, okay, how does their attitudes, their beliefs, their culture intersect, and how can we make sure that we're respecting them in where we're serving the media, the creative we're serving, and enabling the creative to connect with them through the media if we can get to that targeting to help them deliver that salient message.
I love that. I love how we're building a team where multicultural is really at the center, because we know that multicultural is the world we live in.
Yeah.
And we are intersectional and we are different, and people are owning their identities like never before. So respecting that has never been more important. So thank you so much, Stephen. It was a lot of really good information, and yeah.
Thanks, Alec.
Thank you. So now we're going to explore how creative can help us take messages out into the public and help organizations and their causes be embraced. I'd like to welcome LAVIDGE Chief Creative Officer Bob Case, LAVIDGE copywriter Zack Potthoff, and LAVIDGE Senior Art Director Jenn Monroy. Well, hey everyone. So glad you're here to talk about creative. We just heard from Sean and Sabrina and Tim about strategy and identifying opportunity to maximize reach. We heard from Stephen about some of the tactics that help us carry out the messaging. Now we're kind of at that last piece of developing creative, inclusive creative that resonates and takes the message further. So Bob, when we're starting to work with a client, what does that process look like for understanding, implementing what their target audiences looks like into the creative, making sure that we're getting it right from the first step?
I think today especially, it's less about asking them who their audience is and more about just being reflective of America. We're a melting pot. So just trying to be aware and looking at everything from the standpoint of, families are not traditional anymore. So why would we have to approach it that way? And the word that I just use is awareness. We can look at it from the very beginning and just say, we want to be representative of your entire client base, or we want to be representative, we do a lot of work with the state, and just trying to make sure that we're looking at these things as realistically as we can. The other thing I always say is, hire really good people and let them do what they do. So we do this, and the other piece of it is even from the copywriting standpoint, bringing in the people that we need to talk to make sure that language is right, because language is critical, visuals are critical. So all of those things come into play, but the key to it is to try and make it it's just real. We want to be real with what we do.
Sure. So it's really looking at the population we're speaking to, making sure that the visuals, the messaging is inclusive of that entire population, right?
Yeah.
And then how do we, when we're speaking to a specific population, does that require a different attention to detail? Does that require, we talk about a lot of transcreation versus translation and how much of a priority we make that, because we know that a simple translation doesn't work, right?
Yeah, and I go back to a lot of our McDonald's work in the past with some of that, where the transcreation is critical, because you don't want to just translate, because if all you do is translate, you insult people. You don't just miss them, but you insult them. So making sure that you're rethinking it properly. And then the other piece of it is to make it feel real. So it doesn't, if something is Spanglish or like if that's the right way to go, just go there. You know what I mean? It goes back to what feels real and trying to look at the audience. If you have a specific message, what's the proper way to go there, and have that be your overarching strategy, and make sure that that's communicated so that when these guys go to creative, they have the right direction.
So that's kind of a natural progression to talk to Zack about messaging, right? So we're developing platforms here that the client will provide us with their goal. We'll develop that campaign platform, and then what do you look at to make sure that we're speaking to everyone, or speaking to a select language group or a select diverse community?
Well, when I first start, I feel like before I even get into looking at the different audiences, I try and look for, an overarching idea, something that's just more human. And the reason I do that is because regardless of what type of human you are, there's a lot of similarities between all of the different audiences that we're trying to reach. And so first, it's how do I make this human? How do I find a human truth or something that connects to the brand and connects to just people and society as a whole? Because if you can find that, that's going to unify all of the audiences in a special way. Once you find that, then it becomes, okay, now how does this resonate best for this audience? How does this resonate best for this audience? If we need to tweak the messaging to, if we're changing the language or something, it's about transcreation, making sure that we're ensuring that message is interpreted correctly for that specific audience. And that's when it gets more challenging and you start to break down how to reach each of these different types of people. But I think first and foremost, what my main objective is let's try and find an idea, or let's try and find a way that this product resonates with all of the different types of audiences as one, and then really pinpoint what are the nuances that make that message different for each of those audiences.
I love that. I love how you explained the unity of the message, because at the end of the day, if we're doing work for APS, everyone needs to pay their electric bill, right? So like, how are we communicating that to them? It's really the same goal. Mm-hmm. We're just tailoring that language. We're making sure that that language is understood in a way that resonates. And I think that's where you get really granular, right? Is in the transcreation process, is helping to make sure that it's not just Spanish, it's the Spanish we use in Arizona and, kind of Sonora region, right? Like making sure that those languages are, I often go back and forth with our colleague who is from Venezuela, and I'm from the border region of Arizona and Sonora, and she had no idea what a chela was. It's beer, right? So like, I'm just casually referencing beer, and she's like, wait, what's that? What's that? So it's just interesting to look at those kinds of language nuances, even in the regional sense. But when we get kind of into the visual space, how do you make sure that it's authentic? Because I think sometimes you're like, oh, well, I need to make sure that everyone's reflected and everyone's included. And that's good, because I think a lot of times clients push us on that. But we also want to make sure it's real, because we don't want to just stage something, right?
It's funny that you use that word, because that was going to be the one that I pointed out right away, is it has to be authentic. It's not just checking a box. And a lot of times as we develop this sort of thing, especially on the client side, that might be a conversation to have. Well, are we being diverse enough in our imagery or in our messaging? And it's like, well, yes, but also we're doing it the right way and authentically, because just making sure all the colors are accounted for is not authentic. So that's definitely the first thing that I look for. And also just representation matters. So if you're talking to a specific audience, if you're fortunate enough to know your specific audience, make sure that you're hitting it authentically, because they need to see themselves on screen. Everyone wants to see themselves on screen. If you're dealing with a big brand where, to their point, your audience is kind of everybody, you want all the business from everybody, then make sure you're authentically hitting everybody. And that doesn't just include different races, that includes people with disabilities. Another thing that I like to do is just research what's already out there. So, brands are going to do it wrong. They're going to do it wrong a lot. So that's how you can figure out how you can do it right. And yeah, everyone hit the nail on the head. It's got to be authentic. It can't just be checking a box.
Yeah, because I think you see a lot of instances where brands really do just try and pile on in a moment. So you'll see the brands who during Pride Week will change their logo to the rainbow, and yay, that's us. But if they're not doing it from a space that's authentic anymore, audiences catch on to that, and they'll hold you accountable to it, and you can truly damage your brand if you go about this wrong. So if you're not aligned, or if you're not actually backing up what you say you're doing, it can be a bad thing. So, trying to work with brands to say, okay, here's where you sit now, here's where you're trying to get to, how do you bridge that? And I feel like we, even as an agency, are in that space where, for however long, agencies were really white and really male. And so, trying to be reflective of the communities that we do work for and the communities that we live in is a difficult thing. And it's trying to be smart about how you even go about hiring practices and all of that stuff to just try and get right. And I think that brands, for the work that we're doing for our clients, are the same thing. It's just trying to get to that place in the right way so that it's authentic and you're building your brand, not harming it.
Sure. That theme of, there's a term for it called pinkwashing, specifically related to the LGBTQ community during Pride Month, right? And it's just every year there's that company that gets called out. But I think, and it's come up in every segment so far, but it's just interesting to have every team be really conscious of that, right? That we want you to do multicultural, we want you to grow your audience, but we want you to do it right. And we would never push a client to pursue something that they're not ready for, right? Because this is an evolutionary process. We're figuring it out, I think, as a state, as a nation, as an agency, right? In how we can do this in the right way. So, what are some common themes you're seeing in the creative world, like in terms of companies making that evolution? Are you all seeing any trends, any specific examples that you'd like to share?
I have one. I mean, immediately you're seeing it in casting. You know, you look at commercials now and you see America, which is a wonderful thing, whereas before you did not. So I think that's become that's kind of your default. There are still companies that go over the top and will, they're just, it's either not right for their brand the way that they're doing, or they haven't been there traditionally and they're trying to jump too much, and they'll get called out for it. But I am seeing so much more of just things feeling real, right? And I think that's a huge plus. We always laugh about the stock photography world because we end up having to use a lot of it, and how almost overnight it went from all Caucasian to all of a sudden there's this explosion of color, and it was a wonderful thing to be able to go through when you have to use stock as an option, to be able to have it be representative.
Yeah. I think that's really cool, and I like how you referenced being reflective of America and the real family dynamic. You know, which is kind of a natural segue to some clips that I want to show. We're just going to run through a few brief clips from a few that I've seen come up that I think are really special and embracing a lot of what we see in our America.
¿Qué hubo, familia? ¿Cómo están?
Alberto.
¿Quién es él? Es Mario, mi pareja.
¡Qué milagro! Creí que este iba a estar solo para siempre. Alberto.
Qué lindos.
I am an emergency responder. It takes me away from home quite a bit.
Tenemos 4 niños. Es muy importante siempre estar conectados para que él se sienta parte del hogar. Hacemos una videollamada cuando se le cae su primer diente.
Whether it's a text, even just saying, I love you.
Siempre nos decimos buenas noches.
I like the buenas noches.
There for you when it matters most. Unlimited on the best network now always includes Apple Music on us, starting at only $40. Only on Verizon.
So we saw a few examples there of what I think are some that are done really well, and I chose a few of these specifically because they are part of my identity. And the one that was intersectional with the Dia de los Muertos theme and the gay couple, the gay uncle, I think is just a fantastic example of a brand taking a really big leap, a courageous leap, to address a kind of taboo topic among the Mexican culture still, unfortunately. But they're pushing boundaries, they're pushing this community to be more accepting, and then also showing us how accepting they are as a company. Not to mention, you know, the cultural references and just such an iconic Mexican holiday. The other one, which is very reflective of my own household, is the bicultural. You know, I respond in English, get responded to in Spanish. And that is my household, right? So I'm like, when I saw this, I'm like, should we switch to Verizon? Like, I mean, this is like, I mean, truly, it resonated with me. So just wondering any thoughts there. And one specific thing I'm hoping you guys talk about is the use of Spanglish, right? Or the use of that back and forth language, because I think we're seeing that more and more.
Yeah, you and I were talking about this before. I married into an Italian family that's second generation. And so being in a household where that was happening is just where English and Italian were just back and forth and back and forth. I love it. I mean, it goes back to, it's just the fabric of America again, right? We're just in this kind of melting pot. And I just think that when we talk about authenticity, that's authentic. You know, I think forever in advertising especially, you had to pick a lane, and that's the lane you had to stay in. And I love the breaking down of that, because again, you're just getting back to this is how people's lives are, and it's awesome.
Yeah.
I feel like particularly with the Verizon one that you were talking about, I don't speak Spanish, and so clearly I didn't understand a majority of that ad, and I like that I didn't understand a majority of that ad, because I think there's more respect given when they actually go all in. Like, to someone that doesn't speak Spanish, they're not going to necessarily know the entire thing, but they still get the overall feel of the piece. And I like that there's that level of respect there to, or I should maybe say level of bravery there, to not put subtitles or to not cater it completely to an English audience or completely to a Spanish-speaking audience, but letting each language just have its place, letting each person speak in the language that they want to, and be okay with someone not understanding everything that's being said on either side. I thought that was pretty awesome.
Do you feel like visuals are an important part of communicating a message if you are going to take a leap like that?
I think what they did well was they kept it in line with all of their other spots. So you turn that on right in the middle of when she's speaking Spanish and you don't speak Spanish, you might still associate it with Verizon. So they followed their own, brand guidelines, and that way they're still getting their main goal across, which is to put their name out there and potentially get new customers. But when we speak about authenticity, that was a really good way to go all in. Like, I don't think I've ever seen anything like that had so much Spanish with no subtitles. And to your point, I mean, you turned around and said, should we switch to Verizon? Because you felt so represented in that moment. And that's, I think that's probably what they were looking for, and they succeeded in that. Big risk, but I thought it was great.
It's a huge risk, but it pays off. And I think, I go back to the Doritos example. I mean, Doritos is a huge brand that's already owned and loved by, at least I'll speak for the Mexican culture. You can't go to an Oxxo without finding Doritos. I mean, we always have Doritos at our house. But they kept that brand loyalty. I'm here talking about it. I can't tell you how many times we talked about that video. Like, it came up in, casual conversation with our friends. I think that's what they were going for. And I think they got it. So, but they did take a risk, and I want to go back to that. So how can we help clients feel comfortable with maybe doing something that feels a little bit unconventional, or a leap in terms of multicultural creative?
So this goes back a little bit to what Zack was saying. Like, we search for universal truths, and love of family is a universal truth. Dia de los Muertos is an amazing expression of that. And so making that connection to love of family, here's this moment where we go to celebrate those who've passed, and to have them come back and you can interact with them, and then to have that, the brilliance of bringing the aunt into it, and it's her brother, and her saying, "I didn't think you'd ever find love," which is hilarious. That after he died, he found his true love. That, just the storytelling piece of that alone was magic. But then they even built in the moment where they cut back to the other members of the family and there's a little uncertainty, and then you see them all just smile after the grandma or the aunt says what she says, it breaks it, and it turns it into "this is okay, love is love," and just get goosebumps when you see it. Think that's universal truth.
Well, they're also tapping into another cultural value that is prominent within most Hispanic cultures, I would say, is that that matriarchal power, right? And so they have permission now to be inclusive as a family of their gay uncle. So I just thought I got chills too. I think it's an incredible example that really touches on intersectionality. Is there any? Is it difficult to, because it's not, when we're working with a client, I think sometimes they're looking for that data. They're looking for that rationale to say yes or to say more or whatever, right? The question is, how would you convince someone that they should take the leap?
Yeah, I would tell you that I fail more than I succeed, because it is really hard. You're trying to get people to go against their nature, and your nature is, I want something that's measurable, I want something that checks all of my boxes. So you're always going to start from the assumptions, right? The things that this is going to be successful if it does this, 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 and this. And at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is shift the thinking from, yep, those are all great things that you want to have happen. What's the emotion that's going to lead to that? And if we can touch that emotion, no matter how we do it, you're going to have better effect over the long haul. And if you're trying to build a brand, if I can love you, you're going to be more loyal to me than if I tell you every benefit in the world and convince you that those are all there and repeat it 700 times.
There you go. And that's where Stephen comes in with the frequency levels and the data and the metrics, right?
Yeah, and I'll say that like I am a big fan of analytics, but we also have slides in there whenever we do presentations that talk about in a world where media buying has become very egalitarian, like everybody can get to the same channels, everybody can get their message out. It's going to come down to spend, and it's going to come down to how good is your creative. And if your creative isn't motivating, then all of the other stuff is going to fall flat. So being able to measure it all is good. And Betsy is brilliant at telling me, she's a media buyer, will tell me that it doesn't matter how good the creative message is if nobody sees it. And on the flip side of that, it doesn't matter who sees it if it's not great.
Sure.
So it truly is. It is a mix of all of those things in order to do this well.
Well, I think that's a really great way to kind of wrap up and maybe move on to some questions. But, I think what I saw today, and I'll just share this with you all since you're here still, is just this incredible kind of progression from the moment someone contacts us or we contact someone to explaining to them why speaking to a wide range audience is so critical to success and the right thing to do to be inclusive. And then, the tactics that deliver out the message. And, we didn't hear from Betsy today, but we heard from Stephen, who kind of shared that that balance in media is really important. And I just loved this conversation. Thanks for entertaining some of my favorite ads, even as an honorary creative today, and exploring some of those emotions and expanding on that. So thank you all.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks.